Hello. It's good to see some familiar faces and some that are new. Also, thanks everyone online who's joining us today. For those who don't know, I'm Ali Beddoes. I'm the CEO and Artistic Director at Lighthouse, which is an arts organisation, a charity based in Brighton, which has been running for over 30 years. And it's one of the organisations that set up Brighton Digital Festival together with Wide Sussex and Clear Left. This year, we're celebrating its 10th anniversary, and it's an honour to be directing the BDF programme, which has over 50 activities taking place in the city and beyond. The festival has grown and adapted and adjusted according to needs and specialisms. However, it's remained a community-driven platform that supports and encourages people across the city to experience and explore digital culture. So with this in mind, we're also running a tech amnesty. We're inviting people to donate old devices and bring them along to Lighthouse. We're working with Tech-Takeback to update and clean them and distribute them across the city for those who don't have technology in their homes. It's important for us for many reasons, but the driving force for this is the desire to continue to run a festival for people in the city, by people in the city, and to make sure that everyone has access to those activities. This is for future iterations of BDF, so if you have things lying around, bring them to us and we can make sure that they get to the right people. We're almost halfway through the festival already, and there have been many meetups, workshops, installations, gaming workshops and sessions, prototyping, installations, commissions, lots of use of digital spaces and online and in real life. So today, we're delighted to be kicking off the BDF Sessions, which is a series of curated talks delivered by experts in the city. Themes throughout the rest of the week include digital well-being, holding safe spaces for neurodivergence, and the rise and future of NFTs. This is a panel discussion to talk about the importance of circular economy and how digital can support that. I'd like to introduce our speakers. I'm delighted to be joined by all of them. Matt Barker, who's CEO and founder of MPB, who are also our generous photography sponsors of BDF 2021. Atif Choudhury is chairing the discussion. He's the co-founder and CEO of Diversity and Ability and Zaytoun CNC, as well as a trustee for Disability Rights UK. And Dr. David Greenfield, co-founder of Tech-Takeback and other contributors to discuss issues around sustainability, changing our buying habits in tech, contributions to those in digital poverty through initiatives like our Tech Amnesty. And Mariam Crichton, who's our group managing director. Sorry, you're not ours. You're the group managing director of For Earth Intelligence, an industry leader in Earth intelligence. So before I hand over to Atif, just to let you know the sort of routine of now, we're going to have a panel discussion, then we're going to throw it out to Q&A. So we'll come to the online audience first, then our lovely audience here, and then we'll come back to Atif. I just wanted to say also thank you to our sponsors and supporters of BDF, because without your support, the festival wouldn't have been possible. So Brandwatch, MPB, Uplift, Oban International, Brilliant Noise, Plus X Brighton. And also thanks so much Ironwork Studios, where we're here today, for holding this session online and in person, and to our wonderful Lighthouse crew and the camera crew who are documenting it today. So this is How Can Digital Be a Tool for Circular Economy? Over to you, Atif. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so this is really hopefully an exciting 45, 50 minutes as we go through this journey that we're going to share together. I'll do my best not to lose my voice in the middle of this process. But if you can't hear me, just shout and I'll try and shout some more. But just say welcome to everybody, really. So we're going to start talking about a few things. Mostly it's going to be about the digital circular economy and why it matters. It deeply matters, of course, in the context of what we're seeing in the global rush, the urgencies and the influences we get to make around the world, both locally and internationally and globally, and of course what's happening today in Glasgow. So I'm going to ask a question, really, and I guess this is a personal question to the panel and perhaps to yourselves as well. But I'll start really with David about circular economies. why it matters so much. What is it about circular economies that matter to you, and why has it brought you to the fray?
How long have you got? Very simply, I think we've spent the last 20 or 30 years talking about sustainability, and that's trying to do good with what we've already got. Circular economy is about redesigning the system, and how can we actually redesign how we live. We live in a very linear society. We're taking stuff out of the ground, we're making stuff with it, we're using it, and then we're, in many cases, throwing it away, recycling some of it. But circular economy is about thinking about the next life, designing for the next life, for the second life, for the third, for the fourth, understanding the materials that are used. And we're in a global catastrophe in terms of our climate. So anything that we can do to respect the resources and the materials that we use in our daily life, to me, that's why I'm involved in circular economy.
Good, great. Matt, to you.
So I think from my point of view, my entry into this world of the circular economy came through my work primarily. Half my life I've bought and sold second-hand products, and that eventually became MPB in the business that I run today. So certainly from the point of view of what was back then just the very idea of buying and selling second-hand obviously has been around for a long time. I mean, you and I were saying before this, Atif, how the circular economy is not really a new idea in lots of ways. It's kind of had a rebranding over the last 5-6 years in particular. And we've gone from, in the world of second-hand products, for example, talking far more about reuse and how we can recirculate those products and how those products can have a much longer life. So, yeah, that's kind of my particular passion point on it, and getting away from this idea of sort of forced obsolescence that we see, which I know is an area that you're interested in, David, as well, in terms of the Tech-Takeback. So yeah, I really come at it from the point of view of how we can use what we have, think secondhand, think reuse, think sharing as well as part of that, and how that can then help us kind of progress forward in terms of tackling climate change.
Great, thank you. And Mariam?
From a work perspective, I guess we're in the business of innovation, so we're exploring the use of remote sensing and Earth observation in the application of supply chain due diligence, which links in with the circular economy. But from a personal perspective, I think we have lost our respect for Mother Earth. And when you're in the business of innovation, you think you're progressing and you think you're creating efficiencies, but what we're doing is becoming more and more disconnected with and less respectful of the Earth, which is what we need to survive. So it's interesting to explore how can you be innovative without and create efficiency in alternative ways that doesn't destroy our home.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's about, I'm interested in the lack of respect for the planet, and I think the circular economy starts to bring our consciousness back there.
Good, absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to stay with you for a moment as well.
Okay.
Just to ask a question more about, I guess, slightly to your work, in the work that For Earth Intelligence does.
Yeah.
So I have a question is, how can technology of Earth observation contribute to the circular economy? So that's one thing, but can you give an example of how Earth observation can be applied to actually protect circular economies or actually understand them better?
Okay, so you'll have to stop me because I could go on for a long time. For Earth Intelligence, what do? We literally provide Earth Intelligence. Our vision is 4EI uses space data for the betterment of humans and the planet. So inherently, our services of looking at satellite imagery, basically we map the planet, we map environmental impact from space, and we do that by monitoring and providing evidence of what is happening, a bit like police in the sky, and provide geospatial insights. So that allows us to be part of the circular economy because we can help other organisations manage and sustain the impact of their own circular economy. So that's roughly what we do in a sentence. And Earth observation, so we take satellite imagery around outside in space, and we look at planet, and we can map sort of change intelligence that's happening. And to give you some sort of concrete applications, a lot of what we're doing is very innovative. Let's think. Coffee cups. Is it 95 million coffee cups a day? Was it in the UK? Something like that, yeah. So they go into landfill. Landfill, we can, with our partners, GHG SAT, we can monitor methane emissions, which are 28 times more potent than CO2. Yep. So we can monitor methane emissions from landfill. That's an example. We can, I don't know if anybody knows the concept of natural capital. So nature, it won't go on forever. It is a finite resource. And so what we can do is measure nature, measure how many trees we have, but we can actually create a value, like a financial value to it, and we can monitor and manage the value of that through the supply chain. There are questions like palm oil. We can measure the extent, the health, how much, great, we're creating, planting more trees, but how much destruction and what kind of environmental impact did we do to create that palm oil farm? I could go on and on, Atif. Well, actually, one good thing, when you talk about, reusing your resources effectively, particularly like in COVID, rather than sending people out into the field to do all sorts of things, we can help do reconnaissance through space, do all sorts of clever things to stop people needing to go out and deploy resources and send people driving and monitoring. People say that they're in environmental impact, but they might have to send 150 conservationists to a remote country, driving up and down mountains to survey the biology. But through remote sensing, we can reduce the amount of people you send into the field.
That's good maths. Okay, well, I'm going to actually. I mean, it's difficult to read to register these discussions about thinking about what's happened in the last 18 months. And whilst I don't want to dwell on that, it's impossible not to acknowledge it. And so, as we saw, less cars were on the road. We saw a return to wildlife in certain places, less so in others. A question, I guess, for everybody, really, I just wanted to have a think about that, but a question for everyone is, what, if anything, has the pandemic taught us about digital transformations and circular economies? Are there lessons to learn? And what are they? And this is really a personal question to you guys. You can speak in yourselves or for your organisations. We'll start with you, David.
Yeah, well, I think the obvious one is the fact that we've all moved away from doing a physical event like this, meetings at all different parts of the country, to moving to Zoom or to Skype or to whatever platform you're using. And that in itself has had a huge knock-on in terms of emissions from reduced travelling, but also, interestingly, the unintended consequences of that is that actually it might have put up emissions because people have less efficient homes than some of the businesses they work at.
Okay.
So it's a really interesting one. If you look at the big scheme of things, I think we're probably better off as a result of Zoom meetings, but you lose some of the human touch as well, which is inevitable. But I think understanding through COVID, nature and the opportunities nature's had is starting to hopefully change people's behaviour. And that's really critical to helping to deliver a circular economy.
Absolutely. Great. Mariam?
If I think about a personal change, again, it's to do, I think it's almost like, again, Mother Nature saying there's an intervention to restore balance. And if I just think about like where I live and the traffic noise that you can hear outside, I think we've probably forgotten that nature exists in cities at least. And when everything went quiet for a while, then suddenly you could hear the birds and the dolphins, by Brighton Beach, etc. So you could witness it, and it started to make us connect more and know that it does exist and it can exist there. Otherwise, we live in this permanence of not having nature around us. And so I think it was a nice reminder that in a city, nature does exist and would exist if we give it a chance.
Great, thank you.
I think for me, one of the kind of biggest lessons that we're seeing, even coming out of it now, I suppose, is this realization that there's a limit to everything, and we can't simply just consume and consume and consume and consume. Certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, we at MPB, like a lot of online businesses, saw an uptick in demand for our products. In our case, because people were at home, they were embracing their hobbies and photography, and we saw an uplift in demand, and we saw a drop in supply, and everyone was kind of ferociously going out there and actually consuming in the background a lot. Like, increased consumption was happening. Coming out of the pandemic now, we're seeing all sorts of global shortages of various materials in manufacturing supply chains through to literally food on shelves. And I think if the story around what can be done through the power of the circular economy had taken hold earlier, perhaps we would have had some slightly better systems in place to support reuse and recirculation kind of coming into the pandemic that might have then helped what we're seeing now, which is, we've got excessive inflation coming through and all these sorts of other problems happening that are really going to harm the economy as well, and in the long term will then cause, all sorts of other social issues in the longer run. So I think just being a bit more mindful of kind of what we consume and realizing that everything is finite has been a huge lesson.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll add to that from my perspective. So our work is around supporting disabled learners in higher education and in the workplace. And for the last 8 years, we've been working with frontline anti-homeless organisations in Brighton and London. But what we found was how quickly and how ready organisations like Tech-Takeback and others, where we had to get tablets and devices to people who are going to be perhaps through the Everyone In campaign, out off the streets, but the mental health loss and being able to communicate to elderly people, being told to go shopping online when that itself is a struggle for many. And so what we found was that there was not just the lack of preparation, that perhaps we can't predict COVID, but we can predict a pandemic, and we can predict perhaps that 12 years of austerity isn't going to be good to support people through a pandemic. So it's recognizing what were the urgencies and how did we get people communicating to support each other. In terms of circular economy, I think one of the greatest legacies of the pandemic that is yet to really get recognition is mutual aid. We had 4,000 mutual aid groups across the country. Some of the best ones were in Brighton. I was some really good ones in Brighton. So, and it kept people connected to each other. And we need technology as a tool, but we need people for a reason to keep us connected too. So we need to keep it measured as a tool. But certainly the pandemic taught a lot about what was needed and how we can make things more accessible. I'm going to throw another question really to this one's going to be to David, because he was very involved in Brighton, and we're in Brighton and Hove, but this is a conversation for folks online watching who aren't in Brighton and Hove, for other cities that are going like, we want to be more like Brighton and Hove. Just to look at this and say, look, and there are models. There are models in Finland that's really worth, as a state, as a parliament, we're really buying into this beyond sort of sound bites, and the kind of sound bites we all too often hear in the UK. So but Brighton and Hove has got a really good model. I'm going to just touch on it because it's early stages. But there are 5 strategies. I'm going to name them, unless the audience is really. Does anyone know the strategies? Can name them? That'd be awesome. I'm just going to name them. There are 5 of them. Strategy for Brighton and Hove to lead with the 5 circular economy approaches are changing the approach to design, the way we design things so they can be designed and used again and again. Extending the product life. Absolutely makes sense. Exploring a new business model. There are folks here really demonstrate that. Treating waste as a resource. Yeah, isn't that cool? I'm gonna say it again. Treating waste as a resource. I just love that. And the 5th one is the use of resources that will prioritize local, environmental, and economic value. These are really 5 principles that are worth looking at. There's a document that I'm sure we can share with you, but it's a good document. David was quite involved in some of the architecture of that. Would
Yeah.
that be fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to big you up too much, but I want to say thank you for that.
That's all right.
Why these 5?
So there are really 5 of the principles for circular economy, and there is not one true definition of circular economy, but these 5 principles stand out as if you can redesign things, then you can start incorporating circular into them. So we did a lot of work. So just to give a background, I spent 2 years working with Brighton Hove City Council, putting this report together, or this strategy. Colleagues also in the room were part of that, and we actually worked with over 150 council officers to try and help them understand the concept of circular economy and how it can be beneficial. And one of those areas that we focused on was construction. Those of you in Brighton have seen a huge amount of construction over the last few years. If you can design that with circular economy thinking in mind, you actually change what you're building. So rather than building fully with concrete and using no joins, which means that you have to get the wrecking ball at the end of its life, you start building with natural materials that have got joins, so that in 10 years' time you can actually move a floor or move a wall. So design was really key. You mentioned waste as resources. I'm a chartered waste manager. There are such things. And I've been talking rubbish for the last 25 years since I did my degree in it. But resources are out there. I work with a company, I'm director of a company that's taking agricultural waste and growing mycelium spores on it to create a insulation board that can go into houses as a net carbon positive material. So that's really fascinating. Do more with extend the life of things. We're doing that through MPB, doing that with Tech-Takeback. These are all things that are very practical, and the circular economy has to be practical. It has to enable people to think about doing things in a different way. And the one thing that we should mention is, and Matt's already mentioned it in terms of consumption, one of the key things that we can do when it comes to circular economy and putting strategies in place is look at dematerialisation. What don't we need? I'll give you an example. Electronics. For every tonne of electronic waste that we have, there's 12 tonnes of carbon have been generated to get that electronic waste to the past. If you can recycle it, you're saving a few kilograms of carbon. So we have to think very, very clearly about how we can avoid waste, because for electronics, for textiles, for food, the carbon impacts of those being wasted is significantly higher than if we don't have it in the first place. So let's try and reduce our consumption, and then once we've got that as low as possible, then let's reuse it, let's refurbish it, remanufacture it, and lastly, let's recycle it, because recycling in many cases actually is higher carbon than reuse and refurbishment.
Great. Okay, I'm gonna start answering, because I'm chucking it out to the audience, as well as, I guess, firstly, the audience online. But before I do that, I have a question or a challenge for the three of us, perhaps for the audience, is the discussions we're having now on circular economies and what they mean and how there's an urgency to it. But I have a question which is really about, is there a challenge in making, and I'm really interested in what other organisations or cities have confronted this challenge, you know, as a nation or as a city or as a town. But is there a challenge in making these discussions more accessible to other people? And I'm talking about people who wouldn't necessarily be in this audience today, but they live just, you know, on those two streets outside the door. We're talking about class barriers and social barriers for migrants and communities, often migrants who are coming and dealing with climate emergency in their own homelands, but also having to accommodate ongoing racism, poverty, social exclusion. And these things matter in their homelands, and I say this as a person of colour, but I also say this as a human being, that these discussions aren't going to work, and the conversations in Glasgow to Brighton are not going to work unless we are making these accessible to the poor. What is an example of how that's been overcome? And I would love to hear that from people from a space technology idea, or local, or much closer to grassroots. But what would it be?
Well, you know, prior to For Earth Intelligence, I worked in social impact in technology in international development. And what I learned there was, in technology we design, build software, apps, etc. But when you're designing technology on a mass scale for people to use, what you need is you need to get people to use it. To do that, you need to understand people and change their knowledge, attitude, and behaviour. And to make a real change, you need to have a social movement where there is a critical mass of people that will all change their behaviour enough so that becomes the norm. And that's key. So I think as we talk about tech and tech applications, if we don't educate people to begin with on what it is, why is it important to them, especially as you said, most people are just, trying to earn a living, get through the day, deal with life. Like, they want to talk about some tech big buzzwords. It's about how does it relate to them and why should they care, and talking a lot more simpler. It's the education, I think. And again, to make any of these changes, we've got to create a social movement where we communicate clearly for normal people that wouldn't normally be at the Brighton Digital Festival.
Sure, good. Matt?
I think for me, it starts a bit more around kind of accessibility and how, there's an affordability barrier, for example, to overcome there. So when we think about what we do at MPB, it's very much about enabling access to a greater audience in terms of the kit that we offer out there, getting more people into photography, serving a wider audience of content creators, and inherent to the idea of offering up products that are reused, products that have sometimes been in circulation for 20, 30 years, means those products are often more affordable as well. So number one, we're offering people that entry point into something that they otherwise couldn't necessarily afford. I think that's a key thing. We have also got some very stringent and ambitious targets around inclusivity of content creators and storytellers in the content that we push out. So we're very, it's a big subject for us as a business to make sure that we're representing a much wider audience of photographers, videographers, content creators in what we push out there. And I think very often you don't see that kind of representation in terms of wider business, particularly with larger businesses. So yeah, it's simple stuff again, but it's making sure that all businesses and enterprises and organisations that are in a position to speak on a subject, in this case circular economy and access and all these other really important matters, are considerate to the audience that they are trying to reach, and also represent that audience as an organisation when they are pushing out their content through the digital platforms that they have. So yeah, I think affordability, but also representation in terms of living what you're trying to encourage, really.
Great. Okay, and lastly, you, David.
I think it's a fascinating one. A lot of the solutions are already out there, and I think that's one of the key things, that we need to be packaging the messages in such a way that the person on the street understands it and goes, actually, I'm already doing some of that. I don't know how many of the audience are currently leasing a mobile phone, but if you are, well done, you're circular economy. Are you leasing your car? Because what you're doing is you're then thinking about what happens at the end of life. Now, if you lease your phone and then put it in your drawer, you're not being circular economy. You have to give it that second life. So it's about taking what can be we could quite easily go into an hour's worth of discussion around all the different merits and the models and everything around circular economy. But it's turning it into something that anybody on the street can go, okay, great, I get it. And there's a lot of rebranding going on as well. Rebranding of stuff. So I grew up in the 70s. My mum used to go and get my clothes from a jumble sale. We're now getting clothes swaps.
It's vintage.
Exactly. And so there is a movement coming around where you're actually starting to repackage stuff that is sensible, but then there's still a lot more that we have to do. And I think that general awareness is so important. And I've had a few experts in my field going, oh, there's so many new people coming into this sector. isn't that bad? I go, no, it's brilliant, because actually we want to get it done. We want people to just get this and get on with it.
Good, great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, look, I'm going to now throw this out to our lovely audience online first. I think Amy's going to do that. And we're also going to throw it out to you guys in the audience here. Be bold, guys, really, like, even if it's weird, and you're not used to asking questions, you're amongst friends.
We're going to go to the online chat first, so bear with. First one is from John Pratty. Is the circular economy personal? Can we all start something ourselves?
Great question. That's actually one of my questions at the end, so that's even better. That's one question down. Brilliant. Great. Can we all start something ourselves?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'd like to say something. You know, this is the Brighton Digital Festival, and a lot of us have digital companies that might be a lot of, small SMEs in Brighton, and all of us can do, as small businesses, can do very simple things in our running our businesses. So some simple internal things that we do at 4EI is, it might just be we're recycling everything we can possibly recycle, like food waste, or we've got 100% renewable energy for our electricity, or with our IT equipment, and thinking about the life cycle of our equipment, like drone sensors. And actually we have a team called the Green Team that meet up once a month, and they discuss the environmental initiatives and the community engagement that we can do. And they think about, we're applying for B Corp or environmental social governance, and just having that team, which I must say is inclusive of all stakeholders in the business, really everyone in the business, who are passionate and think we'll go about our every day, we're always busy, but they think about what we can do. So something small like that helps, I think.
Great.
Yeah, I think individually you have to look at your personal impacts currently, and there's quite a lot of good online tools where you can go and start measuring your carbon. But I think the key things are just think about what you consume and whether or not you need it. A lot of what we talk about in the circular economy is about wanting and needing. Many of our consumption purchases are based on we want something rather than we need it. And there's a delicate balance. There's a whole load of tat out there that we all buy, which actually we don't need to buy. And there's things coming up. We're coming up to Christmas. How many of you have still got your Secret Santas from 5 years ago? I would probably say very few have got them. And we need to start thinking about the way that we actually utilise the money and the spending power that we have, so that we've got a consideration of what we do on a daily basis. And that's beyond going renewable, making sure you go to electric vehicles, or stopping driving entirely. So there's many, many things we can do, and I think that's what makes it really accessible.
Great.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, I think it's also, I completely agree. Consuming less is the obvious one, as David's saying. I also think we can all think a bit more about where we choose to shop and where we source things from. There are some brilliant smaller businesses, medium-sized businesses, loads of businesses, loads of investment generally at the moment going into circular economy businesses. There's new stuff cropping up all the time, but Oddbox, for example, is a business that sources all wonky vegetables, which previously for supermarkets were literally just going to waste. 1/3 of food waste, I think I'm right in saying, globally goes to waste. So thinking about where we shop, spending a little bit more, making sure that shopping more secondhand. There's big online businesses now like ThreadUp in the States, which is primarily around recirculating fashion, not luxury fashion, sort of everyday fashion. I think their statistic is that if every person in America bought one second-hand item of clothing next year, then that would save 1 billion litres of water, I think I'm right in saying, for example. So, yeah, completely agree with everything that's been said in terms of consuming a bit less, but also like really working, becoming a customer of some of these circular businesses would be a great thing to do.
Can I just add to that, because Matt's raised a really interesting point about textiles, and I've had the pleasure of teaching at a couple of fashion schools on circular economy, and one of the really interesting things is that from a circular economy point of view, I suspect a few of you in the audience have got clothes that you bought over the last 5 years that you've never worn, that are still in drawers with their labels on. This is, again, start to think about the resources that you already have. There's a lot of stuff that you might have worn once, twice, 3 times. I think this jacket's on about its 90th outing. Might even be longer than that.
It's looking good. Looking good.
But it's absolutely that. Clothing is one of the simplest things that you can look at and try to understand the impact of that.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a follow-up
Yeah, please.
from John. Good answers to this, but what about tech and the circular economy? Is tech good or bad for the CE?
Is tech good or
I
bad?
think tech primarily, does enable businesses to scale this up and offer it to a wider audience. Like, my business wouldn't exist if we didn't have the technology that we have today, and I think tech is an accelerator to change, right? So yeah, my simple point of view would be that it's super important, and we shouldn't oppose it. We should just again just make wise choices about the hardware and how we consume that hardware and what the afterlife of that hardware is. I think it was only last year that Apple were fined like $500 million for deliberate obsolescence. So I think that's going to become a thing of the past quite soon, hopefully, and therefore some of the hardware that we use will have a longer life. But primarily, I think it's a brilliant scaler, and we need this thing to accelerate more quickly than it is. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone on the panel, but I think statistically we've gone backwards in terms of the circular economy in the last couple of years from some of the stats I've seen, which is pretty poor, really. And tech should be used to kind of drive that forward, really, and reach a wider audience. Like we're using it tonight, right? We're able to reach a wider audience here this evening through technology.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that as well, if I may. Similar. I mean, I work in the business of, not business, but a social enterprise to support disabled learners. Technology is a tool for participation. It's life-changing for hundreds and hundreds of people that wouldn't necessarily communicate a sense of identity or choices or meaningful education without it. But it is a tool, and it needs to be understood in the terms of where does it do the greatest good. But tech can also be like a good book that you love. You love it that much, pass it on.
Yeah.
Keep passing it on. We love it. No book belongs to anybody, right? We pass them on. And tech can be like a library too, which we can use it and bend it and make it better and feed into it. Open source technology is a good example. That movement is. And even the work that I get to do in Palestine, those stories would not be available, and the understanding of it would not be there without technology sharing those stories and making them real.
Yeah, so when Andy and I set up Tech-Takeback with Kat in 2016, we were doing it from the premise of both Andy and I had been working in a corporate ITAD, so an IT asset disposal company. We were taking end-of-life laptops, PCs, data erasing them, refurbishing them, and selling them on. That was a good model. It worked. My background is public sector. There was nothing for residents, so we set up Tech-Takeback to give people the opportunity to data erase to donate their tech and get it data erased, so it could be given a second life. And that has been very successful. And in Brighton and Hove, over the last 11 months, we've collected 25,000 small electrical items. We've actually got 4,500 reused with charities, with donations through Freegal. We've got 250 laptops to families and to children in the city to enable them to get online and to enable them to be part of the community, because through COVID, one of the most surprising things is that many children couldn't be homeschooled because their
Poverty.
family only had one laptop. And if you've got 2 children at home, you can't do shared learning on one laptop. So I think that in itself has brought so much knowledge to the fact of the digital divide and ensuring people understand it. There's still a long, long way to go.
There's digital poverty.
Yeah.
And in a digital by force
And
agenda.
it's not just the tech; it's the access as well. So
And the bandwidth.
yeah, very much so.
Mariam, anything to add to that?
I just agree with what everyone has said, yeah.
Sure. Great.
We have more. We have a question from Sat Pillai. Is it fair for developed countries to dream of a circular economy when developing nations haven't even had a chance of attaining the mod cons of digitization? Deliberate.
It's a great question.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
I mean, we have to, right?
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
Like, I understand where the question's coming from completely. And I guess I kind of sit slightly more on the capitalist side of circularity around this panel in some ways. And I'm just a big believer in what, the role that every business has to play in terms of, developing the research and doing the work and investing in the process so that that the whole world can benefit from that. There's obviously a lot more that we need to do to come back to the accessibility point and inclusivity point, and to broaden out, I think, what enterprise achieves for developing nations more widely. Definitely a lot more we should do, but it doesn't change the fact that it's really important that those that have the capital to invest to push forward should do that, so that we're here to. Well, this does come down to protecting the planet for all as well, from the climate change perspective, and 50% of carbon emissions is as a result of how we basically just the whole system of how we produce stuff, which is why we're here tonight, is so flawed really. So yeah, I think it's important that we do the most that we can all do to protect the planet. I think it's important that we do the most we can do to further the understanding, to do evenings like this, to kind of push the message out there. But definitely all businesses, mine included, need to do more to give back in that process.
Yeah.
I work in, I'm innovating in the area of sustainable finance, and there is this concept and movement called just transition. And in just transition, it is recognised to solve climate change and the climate problem, which is related to the circular economy. It is a global problem. You can't just have, us in our Brighton bubble recycling when you've got, India and China. If you've travelled there, like, the piles of waste, it just doesn't work. And we're all focusing on recycling. We're focusing on energy, not at the source of the solution of stopping the plastic in the first place. And we're putting our energy in making us feel good every day. And it's great, but actually the just transition is about global leaders and governments and organisations thinking about, we've got Western-owned companies, British-owned companies, for example, and they make products and lots of profit, but they're using raw materials from developing countries that don't benefit from the profits of their own natural resource. So there is a movement around this and consciousness, and yeah, it's a good question. Is it fair? I don't know, because in a way it's not really fair, because and in a way though, it's what is progress. Again, I go back to we're innovating, we're becoming more civilized, but is that progress? Because I feel all we're going to end up doing is we're going in a cycle backwards to tribal communities and native communities who have got it, already know it. And we used to know it and we've forgotten it, and we're innovating and thinking, let's go to space. Let's build a rocket and go to space, and let's just extract resources somewhere else. But actually, we just live simply like tribal cultures do. They already doing it.
I'm reminded of my, this is a personal dad pride moment, but I just share it. when the Extinction Rebellion climate strikes were on, my son was 7, but he spoke at the level and in front of 400 people. And he was only 7 years old. It was quite a moment, but I didn't know what he was going to say, but he stood on stage and he said, look, and I guess it refers to the question. He said, we need to go back. And there was a real pause. And I was like, oh, and he panicked. And he said again, we need to go back. And he said, look, my dad is from Bangladesh. And he said, and climate change isn't something that's kind of come in 200 or 400 years. It's happening now. It's happening right now. And it's a real powerful moment. And I guess the response is really isn't so much whether we've got a Western stick to throw at the global South to say you should do better because we're talking about it in Scotland, but rather to say, look, what are the lessons to learn from the global South? What are the lessons that are being practiced daily around circular economy without it being a new word? And what are those practices that have wisdom to teach us so that relationship of power and powerlessness is examined more? You know, I'm sure you hear it often, never eat anything that your grandmother wouldn't call food. Right?
Yeah.
But it's going back. It's going back to look at where was the wisdom and how do we connect to that on a global level and a local one.
Yeah. Can I add to that? Because I think absolutely, and I agree with that, and I agree with everything that Mariam and Matt said. I think one of the things you mentioned earlier was about a movement, and in particular in relation to this question, I'm a volunteer with an organisation called the Circular Economy Club.
Right.
It's an international network, so we've got 280 cities around the world that are self-organising. So they all work within the same envelope of what is the Circular Economy Club, but they arrange their own local groups. So my co-organiser for the Brighton ones here today, Sat's actually London co-organised with me. But what we're doing is working internationally to share experience, which is so important. I was on a video call with Malaysia on Saturday, and they're embracing circular economy really, really strongly and focusing on fashion as an example. So we've got the ability through digital to actually connect internationally and then get the messages of circular economy circulating around the world. And as you rightly say, it's not about us telling the global south how to do things, it's about collectively us finding the right solutions for the local area that we're in and learning lessons.
Absolutely. Great, thank you.
I've got one more, and then we're going to take it to our live audience in the studio. This is from, it's very small, it's from Nigel. He says, one of my monitors is a cathode ray tube. Is it okay to carry on using it, or is the extra electricity more serious? And with ecotricity, so 100% renewable? Great question.
David?
I thought I was going to get that one. I haven't done a life cycle assessment on that. It's a really important point, though, that just because something's really old, you're stopping the resources being reused. You're stopping resources being used for something new. But actually, what's the energy impact of something that's old? I'm not going to answer that one because I don't know the answer, but I think it's a really important question because it makes you think about what you're actually using and how you're using it. And it's the same with a lot of electrical goods. We've seen the energy efficiency labels change again in the last 12, 18 months. So what used to be an A++ is now something like a Z. But maybe not that bad. But what we're doing with tech, and actually goes back to the point Matt was making earlier, is that as we're evolving and as we're redesigning technology, we're actually getting better at redesigning it. So we're using less raw materials, we're making it much more efficient, which is great for the future. But what do we do with all the legacy stuff? And if we can continue using it and it's got a net lower consumption than creating something new, then brilliant. But what we need to try and do is to try and capture it at whatever point of its life it's got to and give it the most opportunities as it can. And that's where the reuse, the refurbishment and the remanufacturing comes in. So I would probably hazard, I'm going to answer my question, which I said I wasn't going to answer. I'd probably say carry on using it until it goes kaput and then try and get it repaired. And if you can't get it repaired, then think about how you can get it recycled sensibly to extract the raw materials so they can go back into new tech.
Thank you very much. I open it up to the floor here. Any questions from the audience? Here I come.
Thanks, Amy. Sophie Davis-Patrick. We were talking earlier about ways that technology can help circularity. For me, one of the things that technology allows us to do at scale is gather data. I'd be really interested to hear from the panel how the use of data can actually help us make informed decisions about how to use our energy.
Okay, I'll
Right.
take it. Well, hi, Sophie. So specifically, you were talking about the use of data to inform the use of energy, or how can? Yeah. So again, the value proposition really of everything to do with Earth observation to the circular economy is we can see what's happening, we can map it, and we can measure it, and we can monitor it. And we can go back 20 years in time to see the changes that have happened, and we can provide ongoing monitoring of what's happening. So we can collect quantitative data of what is happening and measure changes. So are we being successful with what we're doing to make changes? And to make big changes, we do have to go to the big organisations who are in things like agriculture or producing margarine that have big impact on nature. So, Atif mentioned earlier today, greenwashing. People are, at the moment, we rely on companies disclosing what they do, but it's not always trusted what they say they're doing. And so Earth observation can come in because, again, we can do a due diligence and say, we can actually, all the data we map, we own, be it over a prince's palace or an oil concession area. So that's quite powerful. And we can measure and monitor what's really happening independently. So a lot of what we can do is independent verification of what's happening with real numbers and maps and spatial insights. So there's a lot we can do with Earth observation in collecting real evidence and data.
Great. David?
Tell me to stop if I go on too long, because I'm a data scientist
in
the circular economy. So one of the key things in answering your question, Sophie, is very much if we can gather the raw data, then we can actually use it as information. So Tech-Takeback, I know exactly every single one of the 23,500 items that we've collected over the last 10 months. We know how much each of them weighs, we know the model of them, we know the make of them, and we know the audit trail from who it came to and where it's going to for its next life. That includes disassembling it, and that's really important because it allows us to give information back. I also do this outside of Tech-Takeback, so I've just been working with a major waste management company who have been weighing every single commercial bin that they pick up from all of their premises across the UK. They've put 15 million lift events into a database, and I was a bit like a kid in the candy store. They gave me the opportunity to interrogate it and quality assure it. But what we actually managed to get out of that database was some really interesting trends between different types of businesses. So, as an example, hairdressers produce, on average, something in the order of about 400 kilograms of waste a week, whereas barbers only create about 300. And the reason behind that is because hairdressers use more products than barbers, and so they're throwing away more stuff. And if you've got that sort of level of information, you can then start using that to go and explore how you can actually change the supply chain of that particular business. So for me, data is absolutely critical to understanding how you can actually do real-time interventions.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, I mean, we use data heavily at work, as Sophie knows as well and is heavily involved in. And on the consumer side, we similar to what David was just saying, really, how we understand what our customers have, how we can help them be informed about the next purchasing decision they might make in terms of their photography kit, and making a wise decision and what they should go to next, encouraging them to sell something back, and really understanding the value of what they have is an area where we invest a lot of time in terms of data. We have a head of sustainability starting on the 1st of December, and which is really exciting for us as a business, and I think represents a lot of how we think about things now. But also, Rachel, when she joins us, will be living off the data that we have to do her job and to make those, to draw the roadmap and to see, the path that we go on and whether we're managing to achieve the things we want to achieve, and in terms of the change that we want to make as a business to be more sustainable in everything that we do, not just the circular aspect of what we do. So data's so valuable.
Great. I'm just going to add to that as well. I mean, look, we're facing a lot of dilemmas in human behaviours as well, yeah? And some of it is cynicism, some of it is protectionism, some of it is commercial-orientated arguments, and some of it is heartfelt urgencies. And sometimes it's all of the above, but not often. So data helps us actually put a heart argument as well as a head one, or a head argument as well as a heart one. And without that data, we're not going to get that. What we're going to get is a sense of outrage for some people that other people just can't feel. And then on top of that, or we're going to have some commercial evidence to say, look, it is more expensive to not do this than to do it. And that argument is an argument, when an argument can say, look, waste is a commercial byproduct that we can sell, it is a commercial commodity. That argument reaches a lot of people. I've always been quite cynical about CSRs for good reason. So there's a lot of marketing involved in that. But I also like how data can hold it up and say, well, you're not walking the walk on this. Here's why. And I also like that we can use data to talk about environmental social governance goals. And say, well, this is the data that tells us what we really need. And this is the data that tells us it's your collective responsibility. And this is the data that says beyond 11th hour polemics, we can become measurable and defined by those measurements. Anyway, so another question for the floor. Jenny?
Thank you. I was just thinking about the bin strike, and I know this is super local, so sorry for anyone who doesn't live in Brighton, but the bin strike was actually a data event. So ordinarily, individuals put their rubbish in a bin, and as individuals, as a society, a community, you don't see that. But during the bin strike, it was there for everyone to see, like how much people throw away, and also what they throw away and where that waste comes from. So I don't think it was treated as a data event, but it certainly, I think, was illuminating and could be turned into a story to put pressure on us as individuals. But obviously this isn't necessarily an individual problem, it's a systemic problem. So you can use that data, those stories, to put pressure on the system itself. And the parts of the system are obviously, the council, which has a responsibility to get rid of that waste, but also on those who produce that waste. And so that's us as consumers, but also there was an awful lot of Amazon logos on the cardboard that wasn't flattened in the middle of the street. And that just popped into my head. But what I was really thinking about was the cloud, and what a piece of genius marketing the cloud is. Because obviously we're creating a huge amount of carbon by using data. And so everything we're talking about has a footprint. But the cloud suggests that it's nothing, it's just there in the ether and doesn't exist. And so we each have a mobile phone with a million photographs on it, which are then stored in Google Photos or the iCloud or whatever. So everyone's got a massive carbon footprint just from the individual actions we take. This is a rambling, horrible comment rather than a question, but I invite your reflections.
Actually, I've got a question that follows on from that.
Sorry, male mic.
I can follow a question from that, I think. So following on from that,
when we talk about the circular economy, we're talking about reusing and recycling high-value goods, computers, bicycles, cars. You go onto eBay, there's a plethora of things to be recycled and reused there. But how does digital create an economy where people can make money by creating a circular economy from low-value goods that we throw away every day? Is there a solution there?
I think that's a question for me, David.
It's a very interesting economic one. We set Tech-Takeback up as a not-for-profit, mainly because we're dealing with stuff that has got very, very low value. The 23,500 items, we've had something like 600 kettles. Those kettles, you can go and buy from any high street shop for under a tenner. Would anybody want to go and buy a reused kettle? Very few people do, but some people do. But the cost of actually getting that reused is actually quite high, and sometimes more than the value in a formal system like what we're trying to do. It's a really challenging sector at this moment in time that low value goods haven't really got the opportunity to be formally reused. However, there are platforms out there. So you've got platforms like Freegal and FreeCycle, where you can share things for absolute free. I'm lucky enough to be a director of FreeCycle, which is great. Freegal, which is great. You've got platforms like Olio, which are now doing the same with food. You've got Too Good To Go, which allows you to go and capture end-of-life food at the end of a restaurant shift. What we're starting to see is that people are placing a value on certain things. It might be a small value for transactional purposes, or it might be a societal value, which is it's better to share it for free than it is to throw it away. So I think what we're starting to see with the circular economy is a move to valuing things, but not always a monetary value. And that's really important, I think, for the circular economy.
Yeah, and I think it can. I think there are businesses out there that have been successful at doing it with low value. I think there are some examples of lower value product groups where they've still managed to attach a price to things like World of Books, which is quite a local business, which is huge now, and they're probably averaging £3-4 a book, but that's sort of 100 million revenue business that's done in Goring, and so they're a B Corp now as well, I think. And equally, I would agree on the kind of, there's a point at which, items changing hands for free can be digitally enabled at scale. I think what we've got there at the moment in some of the examples that you just gave there, David, is quite nascent as well. And I think the behaviour isn't there yet. So I think there's a lot more that we could do using digital to really enable people to look to what we've got, what we don't need, and make sure that we're sharing that and that we're passing it on to a new owner. But I think that hasn't really taken off yet on the whole. I think there's bits and pieces of it. And equally, there's other businesses where Thrift Plus is an example, a really good business, I think, at the moment, where if you've got multiples of low-value items, like clothing, another good example, where Thrift Plus is, you sell them multiples of things that might only be worth £1 or £2, they will resell them. A third goes to them, a third goes to charity, and a third goes to you. And I think that's a really good example of kind of extracting value out of 10, 20 quid's worth of stuff that you might send them. You get £6 back. Charity gets £6, they get £6, and they can sustain their business. So, and what digital then enables you to do is to scale that to a point where it's sustainable as an enterprise, which if it was a store in the North Lanes just wouldn't be sustainable because they wouldn't cover the rent. But online you can scale that up. So, I think there is reuse definitely in handing things over for free, but also the scale of online does allow some of these low value product groups to be recirculated and traded. So.
I've got two little comments on Jenny's ramble. You mentioned like cloud computing and all processing. Well, a small tip which people might not be conscious of is that Brighton Digital, we're tech companies, we build code, and we are very conscious at the software development team at 4EI we have to create complicated algorithms that take a long time to run. So we're very constant to constantly be optimizing our technical workflows and make code as efficiently as possible, because then you don't have to run the computing processes as much, which in turn saves power. So that's something small. So a lot of people want to write clean code and efficient code, but this is another good reason to. A little comment. And then comment about the bins. I mean, I was really fascinated by the bin strike. And I actually kept going around taking photographs of the different piles of bins, and I wanted to sort of do my own little mini time-elapsed series of the bins. And what was really interesting, what I found fascinating, is that, you know, the behaviour of, or the shape of the pile of the bins. And actually, when you really looked at a lot of the piles of the bins, people were really neat, and people were quite careful with how they put their bins and all the recycling. It was huge amounts, and I was looking, thinking, actually, people are being very. You could see there was a bit of, oh, I'm a bit like, what do I do? The best thing I can do here is just pile things neatly.
I think it's fascinating. It's remiss of me not to talk about the bin strike, given that I did my dissertation on waste back in the 90s and have been working in waste for 25 years. I think one of the really interesting things about the bin strike is the actual perception that people had and the words that have been used. So everybody's been talking about waste. Recycling's dropped out of the conversation. It's all about what can we throw away? What are we wasting? Why is there a pile of rubbish? When actually, a lot of what we've spent today talking about is around the resources that are in some of those materials. And if anything comes out of the bin strike, it's exactly what you've been saying, that we need people to start understanding the value of the stuff they're throwing away. And that's really important, and that's really difficult for people to do. And if we can't get that message across, then even though the bin strike's been a real problem for many people, hopefully a legacy of that is people start to understand what they're throwing away and reduce the amount they're throwing away, dematerialise and recycle where possible.
Yeah, completely. I think it's the stat on gold is like it's 100 times more valuable for people to mine gold out of waste now than it is to mine gold out of the earth, for example, which shows the value of what we're throwing away, which is just extraordinary, really.
Yeah.
Unconsciously, I mean, there's a big movement as well, especially about recognising what local shops stayed open versus the Amazons of the world, etc. But their shares did shoot up. I mean, they did. People got very convenient and comfortable.
Yeah.
They're trying to recognise those balances that were there as well.
And they need to, I think some of the big, the comment about Apple Photos, it's like it would be so easy for them to develop an app where it just compared all your photos and just deleted all the ones you don't need, because you take 10 of the ones you don't need, right, of every one photo. But then they wouldn't upgrade you on iCloud to the next plan, which is what they're trying to push you to do with all that kind of waste storage. But there's definitely a point now for businesses like that where that behaviour needs to change, and their share price will start to represent the opposite of that behaviour in the not too distant future, in my opinion, where you see that the money coming in at the top that gets invested into companies through all sorts of different funds has got an increasing environmental angle to it, where those funds will only deploy money to companies that are being more socially responsible, more environmentally responsible. And there will be a recognition, hopefully, in that example, where if you're an Apple, to say we need to put a product out there that discourages use of iCloud in an efficient way, to show that we're trying to do our bit to actually kind of reduce the energy that we use in all of our data centers. And then that is the thing that will drive our share price up, not the opposite of that, which is kind of the old attitude, where they're still in that world, definitely, but I'm hoping that will change over the next couple of years.
Good. Do we have time for... I have one more question for the panel, but do we have time for a question for the audience? Burning questions, yeah.
Hello, Steve Creed. You've used the word efficiency an awful lot in this discussion, and I was just wondering if the panel could comment on whether technology is going to help us be more effective, because I think, if we keep being efficient, we're never going to get to zero, because you never get there with efficiency. But if you just do it once effectively, you'll get there. So I was just wondering if you maybe wanted to change the word once in a while and talk about effective rather than efficiency. Up into the panel there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear that in the context of your work.
Steve would give us a really challenging question, but it's very true. I think you have to do both. You have to start being efficient about what you can, but effect has to come into it. We need to start making changes, and we can tinker around the edges on efficiency, whether we can use renewable. That's an effective change, but actually using less energy in the first place, that's a more effective change. So again, it comes down to consumption. We need to be much more effective at reducing our consumption, and whatever it is. So yes, I think you're right, Steve. Less efficiency, more effectiveness.
Yeah.
Any comment?
Oh, I'll just say that's a really, that's a fantastic comment. I think I'm going to start using the word effectively more. And I guess efficiency relates to, you know, you've got a goal and efficiency is getting there quickly. But when you think about, as Matt was talking about, ESG, environmental social governance of companies, companies have profit is the goal, and therefore efficiency links to speed and that sense of efficiency. But now people's values are changing. If your goal is environmental or social impact, then how you become efficient there is not just about speed, it is about being effective.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a completely valid point. I think sometimes we worry a bit too much about all the things we're not doing right, and that stops us from doing the big thing that would make the change. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty of things at my company that we could do better, and we know what they are, and we're trying to get there. But that shouldn't prevent us from like doing a big thing that's right in front of us that would actually kind of just move the bar a bit in terms of change. So and just take a few quick wins sometimes, just to kind of reduce the impact that you have. So yeah, no, completely valid point, and I think we can be a bit. You run the risk of overthinking things, particularly when technology is involved, about how you get to a solution.
Well, it touches on the head and the heart argument that needs to be there and needs to be accessible for everybody. It can't just be in a siloed room, as great as this room is, but we need to look at the social economics of who's participating and what their motivations are and where they feel intimidated, you know? Because it belongs to us all. The urgency of this belongs to us all. The cynicism that people carry, well, that's what we're battling. I'm going to just finish, we'll take one question for myself and then close, to stop for a second to say thank you all for being here. There's going to be drinks at the end somewhere at the bar, but and Lemsip for me, I hope. but there is, I'm going to just really ask the whole panel, just so the challenge I've got is, which I guess it's a conversation of why we're in this work and the sort of the internal struggles that we face, and what is it that keeps us going, if at all. And I think it's important for anyone watching that to say, look, you know, I've got good reason to be cynical. You know, we don't have effective leadership. We don't have good examples of effective leadership at a state level in this country. But we do. I touched on mutual aid earlier today. You know, it's no small thing. You know, 4,000 groups. It's no small thing that the NHS called for 250,000 volunteers through the pandemic, and they got 700,000. You know, that's what this country can do as well. This country can clap on a Thursday and be impotent when it was time to talk about pay rises too. But it can do both. It can do all those things. So it's a question of what keeps us positive and hopeful and connected when, even if there's apathy around us or hopeless leadership, what is it that keeps us connected to what we know is fundamentally our children's children and their generation? So my question really in context of that is to everyone on the panel, but I'll start, you know, with Mariam, if I will, and then what we're in, is, look, you know, in the context of climate emergency and really a polarising world, you know, an increasingly polarised world, what is it that keeps you hopeful?
What is it that keeps me helpful?
Hopeful.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
I think that I personally think that the younger generation now, they have got high expectations and very little tolerance for not prioritising the climate emergency. And I think it's that the generations that are coming here up will insist on the change, because, you know, I think each generation has its what's normal, what's acceptable, what's tolerable. I think my age group, we're sort of like one foot in each camp of, and I kind of, but the younger generations, there's just like, this is all just unacceptable and that's it. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a lady setting up an ESG, environmental social governance, doing some research for, she works for a wealth management. So I work in sustainable finance and this huge, you know, wealth company, and people who have a lot of money, they ultimately want to pass down their money to their children. And she said she had to research that week all the ethics around a gold mine, because what's happening, they're finding, is that the millennial generation are refusing to accept the money from their parents and shares in a gold mine if they are not happy with the ethics, which really shows you, well, that's change. You know, they're going to get inheritance, and they're like, I'm not inherit this money until I know that the money is ethical. So that was a little nugget of, you know, it really made me see that, wow, the generations, you know, younger generations, and all of the activism and the fact that it's, you know, even my daughter, like, who's like 10, you know, all at her age at primary school, they're so conscious of it and they're so passionate about it. Already, you know, they're educated about these issues. So I think that, and as they and even my generation are coming into leadership now, we will be the change.
Great, thank you, Mara. Thank you. David.
I'm very similar to you, but probably going slightly up the age curve a little bit. What I'm starting to see through universities is a huge amount of innovation and innovators coming out of university, many using digital, many using the concepts of circular economy as the bedrock of their startups. And I'm lucky enough, I work in London, I work in Brighton, and I work through the Circular Economy Club internationally. I'm seeing so many innovators that are very young that are putting in place businesses that are designed to disrupt the current norm. And that for me is brilliant. It is absolutely what we need. I've tried to do it myself with a few little things, but some of these innovators are taking the world by storm. We mentioned before we started people like Lucy Hughes, who's Sussex University student, who we're very lucky to mentor. She went viral 2 years ago when she came up with a new a replacement material for plastic film using red algae and fish scale waste from New Haven docks. So we've got people that are coming to business now with an understanding of the environmental and climate crisis and trying to do something about it. And for me, I think that's the first time we've had that mentality of that age of people that have got the enthusiasm, the excitement and the drive to create things that are actually going to change the world. So the more that we can do that throughout education is going to be absolutely critical. And then some of us, as we get older, will just become observers of huge change based on messages we might have been giving for the last 30 years.
Great, thank you, Dave. Thank you. Matt.
Probably two things really. First is similar to what David was just saying there around, you know, my business is venture capital backed. A lot of friends who have businesses that are, and if we look at the last 20 years, the trillions of dollars of wealth that's been created out of businesses that were venture backed that then ended up in public markets, that actually hasn't done any good for the world at all, right? There's a lot of conversation around Facebook at the moment as one example of that. But we did prove something in the last 20 years, which is that, you know, the digital evolution of the world and everything that has been enabled through technology and digital has created opportunity for enterprise, and a lot of people went out there, built businesses, didn't do a lot of good with those businesses, but made a lot of money. And I think with these younger generation coming through, they will repeat that. They will build amazing, huge businesses that are profitable, but I think they will use the profits of those companies for a lot more stronger purpose than we've seen in the past. So completely agree on that point, and I think we're seeing that already at the moment, which is brilliant. And second one for me personally is probably just Brighton. Brighton as a place to have a business, to spend a lot of my working week and to be surrounded by inspiring people. I do find a really good, place to live, and it's a city that has a huge sense of purpose. Often accused in the past of not having enough ambition, and that couldn't be less true today. Events like this evening really represent that. So yeah, I think living in a city that has such a strong sense of purpose for change, I draw a lot from. And like I say, I think we will see the next 20 years that there'll be the next Facebook and there'll be the next whatever, but it will be with a greater sense of purpose, and all that wealth that gets created, I think, will go into solving a lot of these problems. I just wish that could happen a little bit quicker.
Great. Well, look, I just want to stop there and just say, there's some big urgencies ahead of us. They are going to continue. And, and James Baldwin said it. He said, not everything that we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And we have got to face this, not just for our children or their children, of course, that's understandable, but because of the quality of life that we want to live today as well as the choices that we want our kids to have. So I'm really glad and grateful to all of you to be here. I sort of channeled my young son and the nervousness in which he spoke to say we need to go back. I just want to say thank you all for being here, my panel that's been joining me here with Miriam, with David, with Matt, with Ali for putting together the show, with Amy, and all of you for being here today. And thank you very much, and I hope it's really been meaningful. Yeah, take care.